Hello, friends. I'm thrilled to be joined by my friend, Kevin Hill, and we're going to have a good conversation today. I think a really much needed conversation about what is happening in our nation. And Kevin is uniquely qualified to talk about a lot of these issues because Kevin, you are in a position that I think is unique as a leader. You're currently planting a church and leading a church as a pastor, but you also serve as a police officer and as a Black man in America during these divisive times. I think you are really strategically placed politically and socially and culturally. So thanks for agreeing to come on and have this
Oh,
conversation.
absolutely. Absolutely.
And so
I'm happy to be here.
when we talk about these particular issues, what do you think that you value as a leader that guides you during these times? Because I imagine with all the different hats and the different roles that you feel that certainly has to be challenging at times.
Scott, thank you again for having me on. And yes, you're absolutely right. One of the things that I think as far as values go is treating everybody the way you want to be treated. That says so much. And, growing up, your parents always tell you not to judge a book by its cover. And in my profession, it becomes hard not to do that. Does that make sense? I don't want to say too much just because of, like you said, my unique position on as far as the community I serve and whatnot. But I do want to say that we shouldn't always judge a book by its cover because we never know what's beneath the surface. If I were to go jogging through a community, nobody sees police officer. If I've got a hoodie on or some shorts or something and I'm jogging through a neighborhood I don't live in, nobody knows why I have a gun. They just see this black guy jogging. If they happen to see a gun, then it's like, oh, well, yeah. They don't know that, hey, I'm actually here to protect you if I need to, as well as myself. So never judge a book by its cover, just and treat everybody the way you want to be treated.
Yeah, and I think that's well said, and that's something that we all need to apply, every day in our lives. But in particular, when it comes to looking at people that may look different than we do, or that we may not have a lot of experience with interacting with them, I think it's really, really important to not be quick to judge them as something other than what we are, just law-abiding citizens that are endeavoring to go about their business and to have a good day. Because I think that's part of the issue, especially with white Americans, is that a lot of times we look at Black men in particular as, part of the problem. And if we see a group of Black young men together, a lot of times in the past, the assumption, and even in the present with white folks, is that the assumption is that they're up to no good. But I really appreciate that perspective, especially from you as a police officer, because you have that perspective that you're able to see the viewpoint from both worlds, so to speak.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was told once, and I'm sure we'll get into this later, but there are multiple cultures in America. There's not just one. And to say that one culture is less important or more threatening or anything else than another, it kind of puts everyone on that scale of, we do live in the 21st century. There are over 21 nationalities represented in the Tulsa area. I mean, we've got people from all over the world here. And to think there's only two or one right way to live your life and one right culture is insane. And so being educated and learning about the different cultures that are in your community, I think really, really helps.
Absolutely. So how do you deal with people and movements that sometimes are perceived to be seeking to divide, in particular, your identities against one another? For example, you have the Black Lives Matter movement, and then you also have the counter to that, which is sort of, in my opinion, a misnomer, the Blue Lives Matter, because Blue Lives is more of an occupation It's not necessarily an identity, but still in our society, you have a lot of people that want to pit these groups against one another, that you can't be for Black Lives Matter and for the police, or you can't be for the police and for Black Lives Matter. You have to be against one or the other. So as a police officer and as a Black man, how do you navigate those particular worlds? It's got to be difficult at times.
It's difficult from the very first time it came out. Uh, it's been difficult ever since. And there's no real right answer, but I'll just give you my perspective on it. Think about it like this. Black lives do matter. And as a police officer, does mine no longer matter because I'm Black or because I'm a police officer? Or blue lives matter, absolutely. But does it am I in the all lives matter group when I leave or when I take off the uniform just because I can't have that identity? And Scott, I want to say something that I think is it just brings a little bit of perspective to where I'm coming from with this. Can you name a time when Black people in America have ever been able to say that they matter and it not been met with hostility and anger and resistance?
Yeah, and it's hard to come up with a time, and I don't think it ever has.
I mean, people have said that, Dr. King, and I asked him what happened 5 minutes after he left the podium.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What kind of resistance was he met with then? And it has always been that if you're not, again, I've got to tread lightly here. I don't think I can think of a time, and I hope someone can prove me wrong on this, when Black people were ever to say Black power or we matter or anything, and it not been met with resistance and hostility and aggression. Or let's just, ignore it. Let's just act like it's not a big deal altogether. And I think that's what they're trying to do. But what gets me about the whole Black Lives Matter movement is the people who would use that movement to destroy the very community that I'm trying to protect. People who would use that to harm the people that I'm supposed to be helping. Would use that movement to talk about cops. And I think about, don't you know there are Black cops too? I mean, we're out here. We exist. It's such a beautiful, it has the potential to be such a beautiful movement. And we've got to get rid of that you can't tell on anyone culture, man. Because there are people in the Black Lives Matter using that name, but don't care about Black lives. They don't care about Black businesses, Black money, Black anything. And there are people that do. And just knowing the difference between the two and not lumping everybody into one thing, which is what you see everybody doing, not because it's convenient, mostly because it's convenient, but also it's just easier to push a certain talking point one way or the other.
Yeah, and I think that's certainly very well describes what I imagine you must be feeling on a daily basis, where you're endeavoring to serve the community as a police officer, but yet you're also dealing with the systemic issues, the institutional issues, and the history, the unfortunate history that we all share here in America. And so you're exactly right that we would all do well to kind of slow down and consider where other people are coming from. And I think, just to your point, and I know that you agree with this, that just as it's a very small minority of police officers that are giving the rest of police officers a bad name, in the same way, it's a very small minority of those that would identify with the Black Lives Matter movement that would give the entire movement a bad name. And what's interesting is that people on either side of that are willing to dismiss the whole based upon the actions of a few.
Absolutely.
And so that's where we have to be careful. But saying that doesn't dismiss the fact that we recognize that as an institution, the judicial institution and even law enforcement in general, institutionally and systemically, has some issues in this country that need reform and that need to be addressed. And, this brings me to what we all witnessed this summer, and that was the death of George Floyd. And I wonder if you'd be willing just to be vulnerable and sort of share what you experienced as we all did when we witnessed that on television?
Mostly heartbreak, and heartbreak for one of the reasons that probably no one thought about that goes to a cop's mind if something like this is going on, is I knew that people would try to figure out why he was a bad guy and not why he was just a guy. They would try to, because you can't justify that behavior. So what you do is you just disqualify the fact that he was a life at all. Let's just jump right to the embarrassing part. You know what I mean? Let's just jump right to the part where he had dope in his system. He had this, or he resisted, or anything. But there's nowhere in our training manual that someone is cuffed that we don't just put them in the back seat. There's a saying we have in our community, in our policing community, and it is, when the cuffs go on, the cops come off. Because we are first responders as well. If someone's suffering a medical issue, we try to get them medical help. And I wasn't there. I don't know what was going on. I don't know what was going through the other officers' minds. I can't really speak to their motives or intentions. But I do know that if it were the other way around, someone would speak to mine. I know if it was the other way around and that had happened, who's to say that other people wouldn't say, this guy was an upstanding citizen, or this guy wasn't an upstanding citizen. And like I said, I just can't really speak to it. But I can tell you I was heartbroken, sad, and for not only him, I just knew that he wouldn't get a fair shake. I just knew that immediately we would start digging into what a bad person he was. But newsflash, if the police arrived, 9 times out of 10, we're dealing with someone bad, but we're also dealing with a person. And how we deal with people is why we were in the SHIELD. It's why we are the ones selected in the arduous selection process that police agencies put people through. It's because we can handle that. We can put our personal issues aside and we can deal with what's in front of us. And 9 times out of 10, we're probably going to be dealing with a bad person. And we have to say that person needs to see justice, not, what we witnessed for 8 minutes and 46 seconds.
Yeah, and you mentioned that the 8 minutes and the 46 seconds, and what comes to my mind is something that we've been exploring in some of my classes. We look at culture from all different perspectives, and obviously this is in the news. So one of the perspectives we've been exploring is that of Dave Chappelle, who is a comedian, but he also, has a very good way of kind of addressing some of these issues. And you echoed exactly what he said. The fact that he can't get over that people were actually watching this. And, again, we weren't there, but people were watching this. Other police officers were watching this, and yet it was allowed to happen right before our eyes. It was allowed to happen. And so you talked about the heartbreak that you experienced. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of training you receive as a police officer? Do you feel like the training is adequate, or what kinds of improvements would you think about, if you guys were in that situation? You mentioned when the cuffs go on, the cops go off, or something to that nature.
Yeah, the cops come off.
Yeah.
When the cuffs go on, the cops come off, and then we go back into first responder mode.
Right.
Because it's easy to be hopped up on adrenaline and really, into that moment. But the moment the handcuffs come on, you go into first responder mode, which is, how can I help you? Are you breathing okay? And of course, you're dealing with somebody who may have tried to fight you, may have tried to hurt you. But at the end of the day, you're going to go home. That person's going to be put into the justice system, and you do it all again tomorrow. The kind of training we receive, I think one of the biggest things is getting over the rank structure. Human life should come before rank structure. If you see something going on and someone's hurting, I understand that the guy who's doing it was probably the senior guy on the scene, and you'll deal with that in the back room somewhere in an office, but you got to do what you got to do to save a human life. Like, And it may get you talked about, it may get you reassigned somewhere, but at the end of the day, someone's going to be alive that probably wouldn't have been alive had you not intervened. And I'm not saying cops start taking out other cops and disrespecting the rank structure. I'm saying that we all have two eyes and we all saw the same thing. I tuned into that. I think about, because I saw it on Facebook Live. I don't know if anybody else watched it then, but and it just popped up. And someone's like, dude, this is going on right now.
Wow.
And so just from what I saw, I was trying to figure out what was going on to begin with. Like, why were so many people around? What was the whole situation? And we never want to rush to conclusion. We always want to wait for the facts to come out in certain issues when dealing with certain clientele. But in that situation, while everybody's watching, it's like, did he rob a bank? What are we dealing with here? And the training, okay, let's go back to the training we received. The training we received is nothing like, not that I received. It's nothing like that. No, it's put those guys in the back of the car, clear the scene, get that person out of there, get them to the jail or to the hospital or wherever they need to go. What we saw on the side of the road is still, has everyone I know scratching their heads.
Yeah, and I think that's well said, and I think we can all agree. I think we can all agree that something needs to be done. I think the big disagreement in America right now is how do we approach this? Because you have people on one side saying, well, this is just a few bad cops, and others saying, well, no, this is the entire system that needs reform. We need to think about how we are allocating funds. We need to think about how we are educating police officers to deal with certain situations and circumstances. We have to deal with the fact that, and at least in my mind, and again, being a middle-aged white guy from a Christian bubble background, obviously I haven't had a lot of interactions on the negative end of law enforcement, certainly not to the extent that my black peers growing up in the same area have had. But I would think just naturally that anytime you introduce authority or a gun into a particular situation, that has a way of escalating events rather than de-escalating. So, can you speak a little bit to that, and then we'll move on to the other questions that I have. But and I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but I'm curious about a lot of these things.
Absolutely.
How do you go about de-escalating rather than escalating when you're the person holding a gun, right? I would think by the very definition, once you introduce yourself or insert yourself into a volatile situation, it's going to make people become defensive, especially if they're standing in front of their friends and family, and their pride is on the line, so to speak.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, you are putting me on the spot, but I will answer that. I got two things though. First one is, I think that most cops should at least spend 6 months working in a correctional facility and learning how to use their words to de-escalate things, and not just the fact that they have a gun and a badge. I think learning how to deal with authority when you're the guy in charge, and dealing with inmates, people who are we already know where they stand in society. I think doing that for 6 to 8 months, even a year, is going to give people valuable training when they come out to the street and they learn, and they're dealing with the same people, the same knuckleheads. They get out, they make bond, whatever, but you're going to deal with them again. And they've got like you said, they have an audience at that point. And how do you deal with them? To me, it's the same word skills. Okay. It's the same word skills. And you're right. There's a saying that if you're a hammer, everything's a nail.
Yeah.
And when you bring firearms to situations, it's kind of like, you're a hammer, everything's a nail. So you're bringing a gun to everything. And years and years of police work have taught us that as long as the Second Amendment is good and strong here in America, cops need to have guns, and they need to have them with them everywhere, because there's simple domestic violence things that you'll show up to where husband and wife are fighting, and then you're removing husband and wife shoots cop in the back. This stuff happens. This is the kind of stuff that we're trained on. Pulling your gun at every situation, that's completely thing. I think that all goes back to training. We don't pull our gun on every single situation. We pull our gun when we feel it's necessary, when we feel there's a threat. And when the threat is gone, we put it back up. And we deal with everything like we would anything else. What we don't want on that, though, is the fact we don't want cops not pulling their gun. We suffered a loss here in Tulsa. Don't even think the two officers even pulled their firearms out, and were both shot in above the neck. And so we and they tried everything. They tried hands-on. They tried chemical agents, whatever. And the person pulled a firearm on them. And one of them, his two boys have to grow up without him now. And they were just out doing their job on a simple traffic stop that escalated. So we have to keep that in mind too. The second thing is that I wanted to say is, let's look at the area that these things are happening. And I had a well-seasoned officer point out to me that it's mostly in poverty that these issues are taking place. And poverty doesn't see a skin tone. But poverty does have a way of attracting unsavory characters, crime, all kinds of things into these areas. When cops patrol these areas, I mean, they're going to find these issues in poverty. And my hope is that people in, the Black community and every community, but since we're talking about the Black community, would find their way out of poverty and would find their way away from these situations. If you got an issue with cops and you see them all the time, and, man, they're just trying to help you. I mean, that's all I can say. But yes, Scott, you're right. When we bring a firearm to every situation, I think it goes down to whether or not we pull that firearm. You can watch videos all over YouTube where cops walk up to stuff with their hand on their firearm. And it's like, man, why are they doing that? That's just their training. That's just the way things are in their city.
Yeah, and I appreciate what you had to say about poverty. And I think that's exactly what a lot of us are trying to point out, is that there are root issues for the behaviors that we see exhibited in different communities, and the fact that systemic racism, institutional racism, the long history of racism in our nation doesn't help folks that are in those communities to get out of poverty. So if statistically, and this is what I point out to people all the time, look at any statistic you want to look at, whether it's in the judicial system, the educational system, the economic system. Disproportionately, Black people are far behind in those major statistics. If you look at generational wealth, comparative to white people versus Black people are always on the losing end of that statistic. And, that says something to me. That says that there is a problem with our system. And so you're right. If someone is trapped in a system of poverty and they can't get out, no matter how hard they work or how hard they try, and a lot of it has to do with opportunities. You look around and you say, well, what opportunities are available to me? And if you're not able to see those opportunities, you're not going to be able to access those opportunities. So I think you're exactly right. I want to talk a little bit about your family. You have a beautiful family, beautiful wife, and but it's biracial. And
yeah, absolutely.
And I want you to talk about a biracial family in this geographical location. Do you face backlash from that? What are some of the challenges that present themselves?
I will say that it comes from both sides.
Okay.
I would definitely say that. I will say that if I show any success in anything, it can't be attributed to me. It has to be attributed to the fact that, my wife is white, or I'm trying to be white, or I can't just be me. But I will say that it has its challenging moments. um, her family has been supportive in the best way they could, and I will give them the grace they need for that. Scott, do you remember the case Loving versus Virginia?
Yes.
It's a Supreme Court case in 1967, which is 53 years ago. In 53, do you know anybody in their 60s or 70s?
Yes.
They're probably still alive,
Yeah.
which means, for those of you that don't know, you can look this up. In 1967, there was a Supreme Court case, Loving versus Virginia, which gave people of color and white people the right to be married. And it shouldn't be a crime in any state, but it was still a crime in the state of Virginia. And there are people who are still alive today who, what we hear all the time is, oh, I was just raised differently. I was raised, and now I understand that in 1965, they'd have been completely right. In 1966, they'd have been completely right. Because it wasn't that long ago. And understanding, giving grace to those people, if my wife's family's watching, I ain't talking about you, but I get you.
Yeah.
I do understand. I grew up in southern Arkansas, where a lot of people. I grew up in a town that was very. We were kind of split right down the middle on a lot of things, as far as race and all of that. But just to the north of us, about an hour or so, there's a town called Harrison, Arkansas. And if you don't know the history of Harrison, Arkansas, people, you need to do your history.
Yeah.
Do your research. You'll mention something about the Ku Klux Klan, and people are like, oh, that's an old thing. It doesn't exist. Do your research. They have property in the state of Arkansas.
Yep.
And that's not too far away from where we are right now. That's not very far away, and they have cops in that area and everything else, and that's I really don't want to go down that rabbit hole.
Sure.
But so growing up, my parents tried to keep me safe. They really did. My mother was like, when she met my wife, she loved her. True story. My wife is the favorite daughter-in-law. But it has been a little bit difficult, mainly for her. She's so oblivious to it. But growing up around it, I can see the looks and the stares. When she takes the kids in public, she gets the looks. I wonder, are you the nanny? Or no, these are kids. Another thing I notice is how we have to, I guess, present ourselves, because we can't be comfortable in public. We can't go out wearing sweatpants and all of that stuff because, that gives off an image, and people are like, oh, they're one of those couples. But we're not. We're just a normal family.
Exactly.
We love our kids, and we both work, and, we're just we live in a neighborhood, just normal. We try to be normal. That's our thing.
Yeah, and that I think what you're describing is, that's part of the issue. The fact that as a black man married to a white woman, you have to have those sort of inner dialogues with yourself before you go out in public. And that's, when I try to explain white privilege to folks, that's what I'm talking about. It's not that I'm not working as hard as you are, you're working, differently than I am. We're both working hard at what we've chosen to do in life, but I don't have to have a conversation with myself before I go out in public. I can dress any way that I want to, and people aren't going to necessarily make assumptions about me based upon the color of my skin, based upon how I choose to dress, whether I choose to dress professionally or to dress comfortably. Whereas you have to have those kinds of conversations all the time about how you're presenting yourself, because the assumptions that are made about you. And that's one of the manifestations of racism that still exists in our country that a lot of people are unwilling to acknowledge.
Absolutely. Like I said, my wife has to make the same conversation. She wanted to wear yoga pants to the grocery store, with just a t-shirt around the house, just to go pick up some Alfredo sauce or something like that. And for her, looking in the mirror, having our biracial kids, she goes back, puts on clothes, puts on a cardigan, jeans, nicer shoes, just to be out in public, because she just doesn't want that look. And we're very proud of who we are. We're very proud of our kids and everything. It's just that we don't want to put other people in that situation who are raised differently.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean. That's why I wanted to give that grace. I get you were raised differently, and we care about everybody in the neighborhood, and we're trying, we're friends with just about all of our neighbors. If you'll talk to us, they'll completely say, oh man, love that guy. Good guy. Great family.
Absolutely. But it's a shame, it is a shame that you have to have those sort of conversations with yourself, that you have to have that dialogue with your wife, that you can't feel at ease. And that's what a lot of people are angry about in our nation today. That's what a lot of people are really upset about. And, while we should, I agree, we should always give grace. There comes a time where you can't use how you were raised as an excuse. You have to educate yourself, and
That's right.
you have to understand that we live in a very different time, and either you're going to, get with the program, or the program's going to run you over and you're going to be left behind.
I agree. You mentioned get with the times, and this is kind of a neat deal, but it's also a thinker. This year is the year 2020, and 100 years ago was 1920. And of course, people are doing the flapper dresses and the mobster gangster costume. We just had Halloween, and it was just such a cool deal. The Roaring '20s and all of that. But do you know the '20s weren't very good for people of color?
Yeah.
That my wife and I couldn't even be in the same room in the '20s.
Yeah.
I know people want to make this country great back like it was whenever, but I'm just.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things where I'm like, you guys do know the '20s. Oh man, they were great. They were for who though? Me and my wife couldn't even be in the same room, let alone like have a relationship and have a wonderful family and raise that family. And the only people who can't travel back in history and have an equal experience are people look like me. I mean, because she can pretty much go back in history at any point and have different an okay experience. I mean, you could absolutely.
Yeah.
I can't do that.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point that we need to all understand, is that as great as America is, and I certainly concede that this is the only place in the world that I would want to live, to choose to live, but still recognizing that we need to understand that our history is not without major problems for major groups of people, and those problems continue into the present. Even though we've made leap years of progress and great progress that have come at a very high price. You mentioned Dr. King losing his life for the cause of civil rights, and great progress was made, but there's still progress to be made. And,
absolutely.
And as long as we are a part of this fallen humanity, there's always going to be more progress that we can make. So tell me a little bit about your church and planting your church and what that looks like for a biracial couple.
Well, a little bit about us. I wore my shirt today,
all right,
so you can see that. It just says, live the love the world needs. Our church's name is Love Church. And why? Well, because we only have two things that we're all about, which is loving God and loving one another. And when we were looking for a church that existed kind of like the one we're doing now, and it just didn't exist. We're a church of small groups, and that doesn't mean we meet on Sundays and do small groups. No, we're a church that is only small groups, and our small groups meet, and they discuss topics, and it was all about like spiritual giftings and how everybody has one, and people having access to everyone's gifting and all of that. Because there's something that I can get from this person over here or that person over there that I'm just probably not going to get sitting down facing the stage. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, you knew me back when, that was my thing.
Right.
So I'm saying what we have is also necessary, especially for a schedule like mine. I have to, we all work the weekends, especially in the first responder world. So having a church that feels like a church, my group, we don't do worship and all that, but we dive into the word. We talk about issues like this. We talk about the election. Nothing's off the table. We don't have this huge audience that we're going to tick off or anything like that. So there's a lot of fun to be had. A lot of real conversations come out of it. We talk about heaven and hell, and we really dive into it. I can't wait to have you do a talk for us, for sure, because I think it's absolutely necessary. The issues that we're talking about aren't just like right now. We would be in, if I hadn't caught the coronavirus, we would be in a series called In the Middle, where we invite Trump supporters and non-Trump supporters. I don't think there's any way else to put it. We try to say Biden supporters. Somehow, in the 21st century, we've come down to Trump or no Trump, and we address it for what it is, and we just let people hear each other out and take people out of their corners and put them in a circle, and we just call it In the Middle.
That's so good.
Because I can go to my corner and you can go to your corner, and we'll yell at each other from our corners, and we'll never see eye to eye. So
Right.
This series is all designed around asking and talking about issues and topics that bring people together, to see that we aren't all that different. We're just probably going to vote different. That's about it.
Yeah, and I think that's so very well said, and that's a beautiful picture and model for a church, because I think there's too many people that aren't talking to one another. So, how's your church looking? I know that COVID has put all of us behind as far as our plans for 2020, but how are things looking for the future?
And we're looking good. We want to add more groups as this year ends and the next year starts. We want to add more groups. So if anyone like New Year's resolution, but you don't have they don't have Sundays off or anything like that, this fits around any schedule. It's just you and 3 or 4 other people that decide you can make this time of week work, and we meet once a week. We have the pamphlets and curriculum and all that stuff already typed out, laid out. You just read off the card. There's no right or wrong answers. We just want you to hear the kind of people that are around you or near you. There's scripture in the pamphlet. There's discussion topics. There's kind of a brief insight on what scripture is saying at that point. But we want these groups to dive in deeper into what it's saying and really internalize, the words of Jesus on a weekly basis.
That's so good, Kevin. And if somebody wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way to do that?
Best way to do that would probably be by email, which is benhill.870@gmail.com. I don't have a fancy church email yet. Still trying to figure all that out. We're self-funded right now, which means we don't take offerings, and we're not, nobody's being paid or anything. This is just
Right.
something that we needed that wasn't around, so we did it. I'm sure there's many more modifications to come. We're open to them, but right now we're the best thing for what we need that's being offered right now in our area.
That's so good, and really, really appreciate all that you're doing and all that you represent. I wanted to conclude with 2 questions that sort of speak to where we're at in America right now. And the first one is, what do you wish white folks understood better about what it means to be Black in America, and specifically a Black young man in America?
That 2 things. Again, I think that would be my quote today. 2 things. First one, is please don't tell us how to think in order for us to fit the criteria of what's a good person and what's a bad person. Um, there are guys who have long hair in the black community. And it's not because they're bad. They just have long hair. There's guys that listen to loud, thumping music. They're not bad guys. They just like loud music. There are guys who dress differently. They wear bigger clothes and all that stuff. And, you see all the time, they're like, oh, I hope you don't get in trouble for this, but there are people that'll watch people like Candace Owens and say, oh, man, she speaks for all black people.
Yeah.
No, she doesn't.
Right.
She does not. She doesn't value the things that most all black people value. She's unafraid of the stuff that most all black people are. She's probably struck some deal, and she doesn't even live in a black neighborhood now. So keep all that in perspective. And the second thing is, we're not all bad guys, and we want to make it in life just like anybody else. There are blacks that go to college. There are blacks that go to trade school. Go to cities like Washington, D.C. Check out some of the professionals there. And that's all we're striving to be. We're not, there are people that'll be like, oh man, he's trying to be white. No, I'm a professional. And that's the way I want to carry myself. I don't want the color of my skin to come into it. And if I treat you like a professional, I kind of want to be treated like a professional as well. That's kind of, I wish they would understand that everybody just wants to be treated like a professional, and let's just all live together.
Well said. Absolutely. And so the second question that I wanted to end with was, what do you wish that folks better understood about what it means to be a cop in America, especially in 2020?
First of all, we all chose this profession. And I can't speak to anyone's motives as to why they chose this profession. But keep in mind, here's what goes into it. There's an emotional burden on the families of police officers because of the target that a few cops created. And it's on all of us now. And we want you to know that I'm here for you. I don't care if you've made threats against me. I don't care. I had a pursuit, which is where you turn on your lights for a car to stop, and they don't stop. They can speed up and drive away from you. Well, you have to go find out why. And so you chase the car until you do. And at the end of it, there was a flip thing where we run after them. And finally, when the person is caught and they're in cuffs, the first question I ask is, do you need me to call you an ambulance because I saw your car was wrecked out? Is your head hurting? Do you need anything? How's your leg? Are you going to be okay? Because I'm also a first responder. We're not out to hurt people, to get people, anything like that. And I will say that none of us are perfect. Every single cop you're ever going to meet is going to be a human, and they've got human emotions and human tendencies. It doesn't excuse bad behavior, but it does kind of give you some insight as to why this guy or that girl might be having a bad day that day, even though they're wearing a gun and badge. And if you treat them like humans, and hopefully they treat you the same way.
That's well said, Kevin. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk openly and candidly and from your perspective about what you experience on a daily basis. And I just want to personally thank you for your service to our communities. Thank you for all you do to keep us safe. Thank you for all you do to serve and protect, and especially in your role as a peace officer and a first responder. Thank you for all you do. And thank you for serving your community as a pastor, because we need people like you now more than ever. So thank you for all that you do.
Scott, thank you so much for having me on. Again, I've watched your previous interview, the one about abortion. Loved it. I just want to say thank you. Guys, you probably don't know this, but there's mostly time I inbox Scott on stuff that he shares, because I know if I would say anything out loud about it, oh boy. But I thank you for being, like I said, man, that pillar, that light in the community, speaking up for people who, in some instances, cannot speak up for themselves, seeing the hypocrisy behind things, your deal about the Christian church and the state it's in right now, with this election and how they're choosing and what sins they choose to overlook and what hypocrisy they choose to not pay attention to. Brilliant, brilliant. And I think everybody should at least go to Scott's Facebook, scroll it a little bit, click on something, doesn't matter what, and just read through it. You're going to be enlightened and encouraged, I promise you.
Kevin, thank you so much for that. Give my best to your lovely wife and to your children and to your church. And man, as soon as we can, we need to get together and hang out.
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, my friend. Have a good afternoon.
Hey, you too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.